in here. We are on Proverbs 25 and 26, and we actually finally, after chapter 25, the title is no longer Advice for Living a Righteous Life. 26 is actually the kind of people you don't want to be. So it's an interesting chapter. We get to 26 that the thought process of here's what you don't want to aspire to or try to accomplish in life. And so we're going to go through 25 and then get into 26. So let's open up with a prayer, and we'll get our class started tonight and take a look. Lord, again, you've brought us together, and through your word, you give us wonderful promises, wonderful advice. Again, not only how to please you, which we want to do, but really how to be happy in life, and maybe to sit back and think about things a little bit and set aside some of our stress and anxiety and simply let you control things and guide us with your word. So do that as you have promised tonight, and we thank you ahead of time for the blessings we'll receive from our study. In Jesus' name, amen. In chapter 25, we're going to start off with, it makes a mention of Hezekiah. And it's kind of an interesting thing here that if you look on the sheet that I'm going to pull up here, here it is. Verse 1 talks about Hezekiah. Hezekiah lived more than 200 years after Solomon. 1 Kings 4 indicates that Solomon spoke 3,000 proverbs. So the book of Proverbs is actually just a sampling of his wisdom. And the collection beginning in chapter 25 was organized by people in Hezekiah's day. And if we go to our reading, it says, verse 1, "These are more proverbs of Solomon copied by the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah." So you've got a couple centuries later and more proverbs being added here. When it says copied, that kind of the idea of were added to or organized now. So this is Hezekiah, a king, mostly a God-fearing king. He had a few of his moments, but here's one that pulled out some more of the Proverbs of Solomon and added them in here. So that kind of is the kickoff, and we're going to read now the rest of chapter 25. Verse 2, and I did my little trying to group these together using the People's Bible. Verses 2 through 7. Most of verse 7 is in relation to kings. So it makes sense. You have Hezekiah the king, and then he has this opening that he probably was partial to. It is the glory of God to conceal a matter. To search out a matter is the glory of kings. And that's one we're going to spend a little time on. What does it mean to conceal a matter? So verse 2 we're going to look at on our sheets. As the heavens are high and the earth is deep, so the hearts of kings are unsearchable. Remove the dross from the silver, and out comes material for the silversmith. Remove the wicked from the king's presence, and his throne will be established through righteousness. Do not, and this reminds us of Jesus' parable, do not exalt yourself in the king's presence. Do not claim a place among great men. It's better for him to say to you, come up here, than for him to humiliate you before a nobleman. Maybe not so much a parable, but what Jesus was saying about being humble. And then this last line that goes with verse 7 through verse 10, it takes us into the legal system a little bit on lawsuits, libel, level-headedness. What you have seen with your eyes, do not bring hastily to court, for what will you do in the end if your neighbor puts you to shame? So just kind of that connotation, I think, of don't always think the worst. Make sure that you substantiate something before you bring it against someone. And verse 9, if you argue your case with a neighbor, do not betray another man's confidence, or he who hears it may shame you, and you will never lose your bad reputation. Verses 11-14 kind of talks about the word is like. So verse 11, a word aptly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. Like an earring of gold or an ornament of fine gold is a wise man's rebuke to a listening ear. I think we look at that one too. 13, like the coolness of snow at harvest time is a trustworthy messenger to those who send him. He refreshes the spirit of his masters. You're thinking, where did they have snow? Well, up in the mountains, they used to bring that down. Remember, they didn't have anything for icing or for refrigeration, and I read that they would bring some of the snow down to even cool drinks and things like that. And that's why they talk about the coolness of snow as a refreshing thing. And then verse 14, like clouds and wind without rain is a man who boasts of gifts he does not give. You know, all show, but nothing comes from it. And then 15 through the end of the chapter is a discussion on human relations. So 15 through 28 to the end. Through patience, a ruler can be persuaded, and a gentle tongue can break a bone. If you find honey, eat just enough. Too much of it, you'll vomit. Seldom set foot in your neighbor's house. Too much of you, and he will hate you. That's kind of good advice, too. I kind of like that one. Don't bother your neighbor so much. Like a club or a sword or a sharp arrow is the man who gives false testimony against his neighbor. Like a bad tooth or a lame foot is reliance on the unfaithful in times of trouble. Like one who takes away a garment on a cold day, or like vinegar poured on soda, is one who sings songs to a heavy heart. That seems a little odd there. We're going to look at verse 20. 21, if your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. If he's thirsty, give him water to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. Jesus echoed that thought. As a north wind brings rain, so a sly tongue brings angry looks. Some have wondered about that because the rain didn't normally come out of the north, it came out of the west. Some have said, does it mean a northwest, or are we just restricting this to the land of Canaan, Palestine, or maybe it's talking more in general terms, but some people catch that word north. And then 24, we've heard things about this. Better to live on a corner of the roof than share a house with a quarrelsome wife, which is more dramatic when we think of it today. But back then, some of their living quarters were often on the roof, and going to the corner just meant you were going off by yourself. It doesn't have the dramatic effect that we would think of climbing up on our roofs and sitting in the corner just to avoid conversations with our spouse. 25, like cold water to a weary soul is good news from a distant land. Like a muddied spring or a polluted well is a righteous man who gives way to the wicked. It is not good to eat too much honey, nor is it honorable to seek one's own honor. Like a city whose walls are broken down is a man who lacks self-control. Any of those that jump out at you that you kind of were drawn to or want to comment on before we go to our worksheet?
I would just like to say that if you read verse 24 at an appropriate time, when you have a big decision to make, could sway you one way or the other, you know?
As to when you bring up verse 24?
If you just say, well, you're sitting in the pew before service and you happen to say, well, I'm going to read some Proverbs, and you pop the book open.
And you nudge your wife and say,
passages you read. Then you go, gee, I must have got that passage for a reason here.
I think you have to be careful with that, and then you always have to understand. Yeah. You could plug in husband there too. You know, a lot of those can go both ways. Oh.
No, this was all good stuff.
Good.
All a good thing that happened. So.
All right. So we talked about Hezekiah on our worksheets, and then we had verses 6 and 7 are the next thing they draw our attention to. Better for him to say to you, come up here. That's, again, Jesus referred to these two verses in Luke 14 when he watched people grab the best seats at a banquet. All about humility, and kind of if you have been blessed with certain talents from God, it's best that you not try to draw people's attention to that. They'll notice on their own, and that's kind of the same thing. You don't want to hold yourself up in high esteem, but if you've been blessed, people are going to notice, and if they come and say something, that's great. But if you're always trying to get people to notice what you do, yeah, then there's some issues that come with what we're trying. It's kind of the attitude is a little bit different and maybe not the way God would like us to do it. So let's go to the discussion ones. What practical application does verse 2 have for present-day scientists? Look at verse 2 again. It is the glory of God to conceal a matter. To search out a matter is the glory of kings. I don't know if that's the easiest one, but I had to think about it and see what they're driving for. What do you think that might say to scientists?
Well, the EHV says that it brings glory to kings to investigate a matter.
Okay.
The word investigate goes better with the scientist as far as trying to, you know, research things that maybe are not as God pleasing, like your cryo freezing and the cloning and things like that. Maybe it's better off not doing it.
Yeah, this idea of investigating instead of just kind of spouting so-called wisdom when you don't have any facts. You think even of evolution, just to make claims that you really don't have any scientific facts behind, but this concealing God's wisdom, the Lord has concealed his wisdom and really the design of this earth in the form of nature, and he invites us to investigate it and to do so humbly, but to understand, you know, the vastness that scientists need to recognize, first of all, that this is God who made it and give him credit. And after that, then they can search out his wisdom, his design, instead of thinking they're going to figure it out on their own and they have all the answers. But I think anytime we do any investigation into, for example, into nature and into God's world, we're humbled by the fact that there is so much of his glory that he has hidden from us that we don't know about. And I don't know if you can sit through a science class and hopefully being taught by a Christian, when you look at the intricacies of everything from the human body to the plant life and to how the world is made and molecules and all that, you finally have to come back and give God glory for how wise he is and how this just didn't develop. You talk about how many nerve endings we have and how this all works together. And you have to come away with saying there's got to be something out there, and especially give glory then to God for something like that too. So I think that's what's coming across in that passage that we have. It is the glory of God to conceal a matter. You know, he holds it back from us. We don't know everything about God, nor need we know everything about God. And so he just wants us to kind of search things out. Okay, look at the next one then. What bad reputation will someone gain who betrays another man's confidence, in verse 9? Again, the verse was, if you argue your case with a neighbor, do not betray another man's confidence. What's going to happen with your reputation if you betray another man's confidence? Just had this in confirmation this past week, or last week, I should say.
You can get the reputation as being untrustworthy or a bit of a gossip.
Yeah, I think there's that. You know, we talked about the whole eighth commandment and confirmation. I think it really kind of resonated with the kids because there's so many situations where they get in about having, hey, I wasn't supposed to tell anyone. I told the kids, if somebody tells you that, I wasn't supposed to tell anyone, but are you ever going to trust them with a secret of yours? If you say, no, you can't tell anyone, which someone obviously told them, but they then were going to tell you, like, hey, I got to tell you about this. And I could just see the kids, maybe not fidgeting, but I said, how many times have you done that yourself to where you were, hey, can I tell you something? You can't tell anyone else. And then you think somehow you're covering yourself when you do tell someone, I wasn't supposed to tell anyone, but, and I go, do you think people are going to trust you with anything in the future when they find out you've told someone? And if someone is telling you that, or if you say that to someone, do you think they're ever going to say something back to you? So yeah, that's the reputation. You get the reputation of being a gossip who can't keep a secret and wouldn't be trusted. Next one. Verses 7 and 8 give us wisdom as witnesses to a crime. What is that wisdom? In verses 7 and 8, it says, it is better for him to say to you, come up here, than for him to humiliate you before a nobleman. What you have seen with your eyes, do not bring hastily to court, for what will you do in the end if your neighbor puts you to shame? And again, the question, wisdom as witnesses to a crime. What is that wisdom that we're supposed to show in witnessing a crime?
Sure you have your facts straight?
Yeah, I like how you put that. Things aren't always as they seem. And if you are going to be, because at first you look at that and you say, well, is that saying you shouldn't tell what you know? No, it's saying you should make sure what you're seeing, because a lot of things people can jump out and jump into different things. Look at my wife coming up here. So getting her walking in, I see. Can you hear us? Whoops, she's off the video. You're not going to keep your walking video on, dear? Now she's on. She's somewhat on. Well, I think she'll be on. She'll let her join us. She's probably on her way home. Some thoughts and questioning may reveal a different story to what we're looking at with that one. How about verse number 4? How is the rebuke of a wise man like an earring or ornament of gold that we had in verse 12? Like an earring of gold or an ornament of fine gold, a wise man rebuked to a listening ear. So how is the rebuke of a wise man like an earring of ornament or ornament of gold?
A lot of the EHV, the verses are turned backwards for the way that you're reading. Because in verse 12, this says, to ears that listen, a wise person's correction is like a gold ring or like jewelry made of pure gold. So it actually does the cause and effect.
Yeah, there is an outline of how the book of Proverbs, there's different styles used, and it was a little heady when I looked at it, because there was talking about exactly what you're saying, that this is a different approach to how you have things where it could be understood better, sometimes flip-flopping it, because that when you read it, you almost think, okay, I'd understand it better. And so the way you put it, okay, you're talking about
to ears that listen, a wise person's correction is like a gold ring or like jewelry made of gold. So it actually flows better where it makes a little more sense.
So tell me if I'm way off base on this. I was thinking about, okay, so they're really saying that if someone rebukes you that is a wise person that knows his stuff, it's precious and valuable, and if you listen to it, it's like you're gaining something. Usually if we're rebuked for something, it's almost a humbling thing where we don't want anyone else to know, or we hide it, or we aren't honest about it. And I'm thinking here, if you have that ornament of gold, an earring or ornament of gold, you display that. And we're so contrary about displaying if someone corrects us. Why don't we say, I was going to do this, but then I talked to so-and-so and he said, no, that's totally wrong. But we're kind of shy about that because we have such an ego, and we're so arrogant at times that we're afraid to take the hit, and we kind of cover that up, when it's really saying if you've had someone that set you straight, don't be so shy about it, or the fact that you don't want other people to know, because you wouldn't hide an earring or ornament of gold. It would be on display. So I didn't know if I was thinking deeper than it should have there. Jim?
I guess I think about, like the way stuff is said to you. There's somebody can tell you that you're wrong, or somebody else can say that you're wrong in a lot different way. And it's just, this just that delivery.
How true it is.
How you handle it. And that's the first thing that came to me is just a wise man is telling you, and it's just like I said, it's wording and how you handle it, and how you approach it, and all that stuff. To me, I don't know.
If it's coming from a wise man, it's kind of assumed that he's going to be approaching you in a way where he's not just going to, drill you or bury you.
Right.
So I think you're right. I think that makes some sense. So it's kind of a cool verse then. Another one, number 5. What practical application might verse 20 have on a nursing home visit? I want you to get your opinion on this, because it almost sounds kind of backwards. Like one who takes away a garment on a cold day, or like vinegar poured on soda, is one who sings songs to a heavy heart. And it's not just saying maybe it's someone that can't carry a tune. What is the point there? Because it almost seems backwards that, wouldn't you want to sing songs and cheer up someone with a heavy heart? Anyone see anything into that? Because some residents would love that, but what might be the issue there?
Okay, so I'm looking at, okay, you take off a coat on a cold day, maybe because you've gone inside and it's warm and you don't need it. Vinegar on baking soda does the foaming, it makes it active. So maybe the singing songs to a despondent heart, it's saying it's going to pep them up and make them feel better.
But it doesn't almost seem to say the opposite, though.
Yeah.
Is one who sings songs, okay, and I'll tell you, this is kind of the way that even the People's Bible had it too, this idea that if you're using songs of joy and cheer, a person with a heavy heart, maybe that's not what they need to hear. Maybe they need to have more of comfort and not just don't worry, be happy type attitude. Would that be, maybe that's what they're driving at, that if you're going to, not try to understand where they're coming from and just try to be all cheerful and everything, that good old having sympathy and trying to understand what they're going through is needed, instead of, just saying, oh, have a great day and here, I'll sing you a happy song. It just struck me odd when I first read it, because I thought I'd almost be saying, shouldn't you try to do this with the point of wanting to cheer them up? So,
Yeah.
You got something on that?
Well, I kind of look at it, the way I look at it is like somebody comes to you and they have a problem, and they've trusted you and they're looking for advice, or, and you say, oh, it'll be okay, kind of send them down the road. Okay, they've came to you, they have an issue, but you're not doing anything for them. You're not pointing in the right direction. You're not, it's just, oh, it'll be okay, and that's kind of the impression that I got first of it, instead of, if you've got answers to stuff, point them in the right direction, get them,
I thought of that good old song, Don't Worry, Be Happy, almost says, hey, why the sad face? Come on, cheer up. I mean, to act as if it's not something big for them, or they shouldn't be taking it so seriously or whatever that's bothering them. You can't downplay the problems of others. And I think it goes back to, I hope and pray it's made me a better pastor over the years, when I started to realize that we don't always know what other people are going through, and we just can't be judgmental, and we can't just say, I don't know what their problem is, why they treated me like that, or why they said what they did. We just don't always know what's behind the scenes. And maybe because at times I've been let in behind the scenes, and then I realize that more. But we kind of go through life always putting on this persona that things are okay. And it's almost like not the way to go, to let people in on your true feelings. We always want to give this outer thing. So then when we do show some frustration or some struggles, sometimes that's taken negatively by others, when we think that everybody should be fine. But everyone is dealing with something, and we're all vulnerable to different things. So, but yeah, that was an interesting one. That it said applied it to a nursing home visit, and I keep that in mind with my shut-ins. I like to just have them tell me how things are going, and I hope I never say, "Oh, come on, it can't be that bad." You don't want to say that, I guess, to someone in the nursing home, because we don't know everything they're going through. Here's the next one. It says, Martin Luther quoted an old proverb that said, friends are thieves of time. One of his lighter moments, friends are thieves of time. Verse 17 says much the same thing. And just for a reminder, verse 17, seldom set foot in your neighbor's house, too much of you, and he will hate you. Could you be one? No, it says, for verse 17 says the same thing. Are there people in your life who visit but never leave? And you can't say the in-laws. Could you be one of those people yourself? Could this apply to your children who are always at someone else's house? Could it apply to the use of the telephone or to instant messages on the computer? Talking about texting and everything. What do you think there? What is kind of the point being made there?
Well, kind of mind your own business when you go to your neighbors too. I mean, there's nothing worse than going to someone's house and trying to, tell them how they can improve on things around the house,
Yeah.
That,
Good point.
you just wear out your welcome.
But when they threw in the part about the phone and instant messaging, the computer,
Yeah.
it kind of, this whole idea, I always think the opposite in our society today. And I'm glad this came up because I'm thinking as far as being in each other's homes, that's kind of faded, but we are in other people's lives so much through the constant contact and everything. And some of this might be just to respect people's privacy or in some way, respect other people's time. I appreciate with our neighbors, we were sitting in the garage the other day with them Sunday, and they just said, both Adam and Denise, our girls aren't, and they wanted to come over and play with the kitties. We said, sure, we'll take you over there and you can play with the cats. And they're not bothering you. I know they always want to go over and play with your cats. And we go, no, they're fine. They're very good girls. They like to come play with the cats. We said, come over anytime. And it was just like the neighbors, I was thinking of that when they said, well, we don't want them to be a pain. I said, your daughters are not pains. They're such good girls. But that idea that, just respecting the privacy of people, their time, that too, when it talks about the phone and computer and all that, and especially with people's homes, that it's nice nowadays when you can go into people's homes, or you have that kind of home where you don't mind if people come into your home. So that's something that now that we're like the grandparents of the cul-de-sac, I think we get all the kids coming into our home, it seems. So it's something we haven't had for a while. It used to be we were all in our little clusters, and our cul-de-sac kind of did a transformation with young families, and now it's like kids everywhere. So let's go over to the weird people's house with all the cats, and so they come over and play with their cats, I think. So number 7, unless I see something else. 7. What will likely happen if you do nice things to someone who has been your enemy? And they're bringing out verse 21 that says, if your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. If he's thirsty, give him water to drink. And it says, and even if this doesn't work, what promise is given in verse 22, which is echoed in Romans? In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. So what nice things will likely happen if you're nice to someone who was your enemy?
You just gain favor in the eyes of the Lord.
I think that's the ultimate, that God will reward you when it talks about if even if you don't win that person over. Isn't that the ultimate, that God says you're still doing? It's one of those things where you can't control the results, but maybe that burning coals aspect of your enemy becoming ashamed of how they're treating you, if it's always one-sided, because that someone that is antagonistic toward you, what feeds them? Having you respond back. Because if they keep firing away at someone who doesn't respond, why keep doing it? But if you keep giving them some ammunition, then they're going to keep that up. So I think that's kind of what they're driving at. Okay, the verse they pulled out at the end of this lesson, a word aptly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. A word aptly spoken at just the right time. Thoughts or comments on chapter 25? 26 is the kind of people you don't want to be. Sometimes there's a lot of teaching and not just saying here's what you should be, but in actually saying here is what you should not be. And that's what chapter 26 gets into. So I'm going to go back to here and move it up a chapter. And this one, first of all, you have the categories they have. The first 12 verses talk about the fool, and then 13 to 16, the lazy person, 17 to 19, concerning meddling, 20 to 22 is someone who gossips, and 23 to 28, the evils of lying. So pretty much everything that is not something that we would find desirable. And so let's just read through chapter 26 here. And again, the first 12 verses, the fool. Like snow in summer or rain in harvest, honor is not fitting for a fool. Like a fluttering sparrow or a darting swallow, an undeserved curse does not come to rest. You think of the bird that's constantly buzzing your head. An undeserved curse is always there bothering you. A whip for the horse, a halter for the donkey, and a rod for the backs of fools. We're going to talk about 5 or 6, and if you're confused when you first hear them, yeah, so is your pastor. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you will be like him yourself. Answer a fool according to his folly, or he will be wise in his own eyes. That's probably the first, most in all these chapters, the one that I stopped and said, I don't get that, and tried to do some reading on it. We're going to discuss that one because it's saying the opposite back to back here. So we'll talk about that. 6, like cutting off one's feet or drinking violence is the sending of a message by the hand of a fool. Like a lame man's legs that hang limp is a proverb in the mouth of a fool. Like tying a stone in a sling is the giving of honor to a fool. Think if David and Goliath, if that stone was tied in the sling, it never would have come out. 9, like a thorn bush in a drunkard's hand is a proverb in the mouth of a fool. Like an archer who wounds at random is he who hires a fool or any passerby. As a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool repeats his folly. Do you see a man wise in his own eyes? There is more hope for a fool than for him. And then 13 to 16, get back to again, comes up a few times, a theme of someone who's lazy. The sluggard says, there's a lion in the road, a fierce lion roaming the streets. Found it interesting, we've had similar sayings before, that any excuse not to go to work or to get out of bed, and they use, I think it's translated lion a couple times, but it's always intensified. Every time they brought up the proverb, there's a different word used, almost as if to say the excuses become greater and more profound when someone's trying to think of reasons not to work. As a door turns on its hinges, so a sluggard turns on his bed. And I read also where it says it doesn't leave his bed either, and door doesn't leave the hinges. The sluggard buries his hand in the dish. He's too lazy to bring it back to his mouth. And then the sluggard is wiser in his own eyes. That 7 men who answer discreetly. That 7 is the number of completion or perfection. You could say that then several men, if you wanted to translate it that way. And then about meddling, 17 to 19. Like one who seizes a dog by the ears is a passerby who meddles in a quarrel not his own. Understand, these were not puppy dogs. Dogs back in those days were pretty nasty and kind of just roam the streets. So if you wanted to grab one of those by the ears, you'd probably pay for it. 18, like a madman shooting firebrands or deadly arrows is a man who deceives his neighbor and says, I was only joking. Lisa, what does it have for that in EHV? Does it say the same phrase, I was only joking?
Yeah, it actually does.
Okay, I was thinking if that's really kind of how it translates.
Yep.
20 to 22 is the avid gossiper. Without wood, a fire goes out. Without gossip, a quarrel dies down. It's kind of neat because you don't say, well, she also said this, or I heard that. Well, if you don't add fuel to the fire, quarrel goes away. 21 is charcoal to embers and is wood to fire, so is a quarrelsome man for kindling strife. And 22, the words of a gossip are like choice morsels. They go down to a man's inmost parts. And then the last verse is about lying. We're going to talk about 23. Like a coating of glaze over earthenware are fervent lips with an evil heart. A malicious man disguises himself with his lips, but in his heart he harbors deceit. Though his speech is charming, do not believe him, for 7 abominations fill his heart. His malice may be concealed by deception, but his wickedness will be exposed in the assembly. If a man digs a pit, he'll fall into it. If a man rolls a stone, it will roll back on him. A lying tongue hates those it hurts, and a flattering mouth works ruin. So there's chapter 26, a little bit different emphasis, the kind of people you don't want to be. Anything on those verses before we look to our worksheet? Look at verse 1 where it says fool. 11 of the first 12 verses in this chapter refer to the fool. I think verse 2 does not. A fool may be intelligent, but morally and spiritually they're weak and corrupt. And then that illustration or that picture in verse 2, a fluttering sparrow or a darting swallow, just tells us in 1 Kings, it says that Solomon taught about animals and birds, reptiles, and fish, being as wise as he was. In this chapter, he makes reference to a sparrow, swallow, horse, donkey, dog, and lion. So you have more animals brought in here. And verse 6, just the phrase of cutting off one's feet, we would say today, shoot yourself in the foot. So if you trust a fool to deliver a message, you're shooting yourself in the foot. That message will surely get garbled. Cutting off one's feet is the way they would say it then. So let's look at these verses 4 and 5. They seem to be contradictory. Can you reconcile these verses? Whoops. No, I have to.
Well,
You got it already, Phil?
well, yeah, I sort of, my verse 4 was, do not answer a fool like a fool. Keep it, if you answer a fool like a fool, then you become the fool.
I
But
think you're
In
actually...
a proper manner, you more the wise and sage person, then it may have a different effect.
I think you're actually coming very close to what most of the things I read came up with. When it says, do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you will be like him yourself. No, I lost my other worksheet here. Let me find Proverbs again. There it is. Come on my screen. There we go. They seem contrary. Can you reconcile these verses? So once more, Phil, when you said, okay, when a fool confronts a wise person, as it says here, there's a choice that has to be made. You know, it says, first it says, do not answer, then it says answer. So first, if you look at it, what you're saying, Phil, I think it's on the right line. You have to decide how you're going to talk to him, right?
Yeah, well, in verse 4, it's telling you to not answer him in the manner which he was addressing you. If he was addressing you as a fool, talking off his head, then you don't answer him in that manner.
Yeah, I think you're right on, because
if you answer the fool in a respectful way with facts and I just said in a proper manner on the subject and so forth. If you just have to not, you need to give them an answer where you think you are the fool, but if you give them an answer that is what they expect, then you are the fool.
I think you've probably right away hit it pretty much on the head, because verse 4, it says, you can't sink to his level. You don't answer him the way he's speaking to you. But then verse 5 comes back and it says, but you really can't leave it unanswered, because then he's going to think that it's how you
got the best and you are the fool.
Yeah. So there, I did all this reading on that because I say, wow, that's awful confusing. And now the whole fact is that, really, that's what I think we can understand it that way. That's what it's saying. So
it's okay. I went to college 9 years to get there. It's not like I just, It
was in that 9th year then that you came across that, right?
Something like that.
Okay, so that must have been, because I was sitting there going, man, I got to explain this, and I seem confused by it. So one statement I had here: use your wisdom to evaluate the fool's folly and to speak to him or her according to his folly. That is, speak directly to the folly, expose it, and refute it. Which, don't sink to his level, but don't let him get away with what he's saying either. So appreciate that, Phil. Thanks. Are you comfortable with that? Because I think that was well done.
Yeah, I think, like a real good example would be like with a cop in a cop situation, in a high tense situation, you have to you got somebody with a gun, and you can escalate the situation, or or you can talk calmly to them. That's a real good example of it.
Okay.
I would say. Because you have to answer back. You can't walk away if it's a, kind of got guns drawn and you're kind of at standoff type of a deal.
Mm-hmm.
At times the other side is going to be a lot more just a fool, otherwise they wouldn't be in the situation they're in. But
He reads the Arc City paper too much.
I think that's the example I'm thinking of. Right there is a real good where you can really see where.
I think it does come down when you approach someone that's a fool or using foolish language. How are you going to approach them? You got to think it through. Don't sink to their level, but at the same time they have to be addressed. And I think that's probably what you're saying too, Jim. So yeah, it makes some sense. Good. Describe a person who is wise in his own eyes, from verses 12 and 16. A person wise in his own eyes. I thought of a name or a description for someone like that. See if you guys think of the same.
They're vain. I keep thinking that you're so vain song.
There's the song, Carly Simon, right? See, if you're old enough, it's Carly
This
Simon.
song is about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought a know-it-all. If you get across someone who, no matter what the topic is, has the definitive answer on it and knows everything and has all the answers. You try to tell them something, nope, they already know it. You can't teach them a thing, and hopefully we don't come across that way to people if we're trying to share something with them. But wise in his own eyes, for some reason they find that a big gap in their self-esteem if they have to admit to not knowing something. And I don't know, I always think as WELS Lutherans, the fact that we confess our sins, we're pretty good at admitting we don't know everything, and maybe humility comes because of that, comes a little bit easier for us in fighting that sinful nature. Verse 17, I'm going to go to the verse first so you know what it says. Says, like one who seizes a dog by the ears is a passerby who meddles in a quarrel not his own. And that says, don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong is the advice of verse 17. What's going to happen if you do?
You'll get bit.
You'll get bit, yeah. It's kind of and again, knowing the Bible times about these scavenger dogs that you see in some of these impoverished countries, they're not the cute puppy dogs that you're saying, oh, you're so cute. You just stay away from them or you're going to get bit. I had my friend, Pastor Baumler, down in El Paso, called me last night, and he says, hey, last week I got to tell you, I was taking a walk. I had my headphones on, and I heard a car screech, and I saw 3 dogs that had gotten out of the house across the street coming right at me. 2 were very small, and one was a Great Dane. And he said, if I wouldn't have heard the car screech, he would have bowled me right over. But he kind of came right up to me, and he said, we had that moment where we look eye to eye, and then he bit me right in the leg. He showed me his bite. And he says, I climbed right up on the car that was next door and yelled, help, and then another car stopped, and people called the dog. Oh, those are our dogs, come in. And his wife convinced him to go to the hospital emergency or whatever. And then they got to report it. So then he saw animal control over there. And he said he later talked to animal control, and they said, oh, they were very cooperative and very sorry for what had happened. But he said, when you see a Great Dane coming down on you, and I said, okay, Dan, be honest, it was a Chihuahua. And it was a pack of 3 Chihuahuas that just knocked you over. And he goes, no. I said, every time you've told this story, it probably got to be a bigger dog. It'll be a St. Bernard before too long. But he sent me a picture. It was a pretty good bite he got. So, yeah, dogs. I told him some of my old paper route stories then too. So, how about the next one that says, what do verses 18 and 19 tell us about playing practical jokes on others? It says, like a madman shooting firebrands or deadly arrows is a man who deceives his neighbor and says, I was only joking. What is that? What's the caution there, maybe, if we use that?
There is no good that can usually come of it.
None whatsoever, Phil, out of a good practical joke?
Rarely, but generally, no. I mean, you got to be the ultimate optimist if you think playing a practical joke on someone. I mean, that's just too much optimism for me.
Phil, I had 3 brothers.
On someone's never good.
I have 3 brothers, Phil. You can't tell me I couldn't play practical jokes on my brothers.
Well, I just...
My caution was... Go ahead, Lisa.
This isn't your brother. This is your neighbor.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
little difference between siblings, and
okay, but your neighbor is everyone, though, is what I was taught. So
but back in these days, your neighbor was your brother.
That's true.
Is it fair to say we just have to be sensitive and know our audience, or know our people that we're
you do
around
need
with?
to know what's off limits.
Yeah, I mean, and if you don't know, I think the caution is there that be sensitive that if you're teasing or joking with someone and you don't know much about them, that you can offend them and you can harm them.
Yeah. It kind of goes back to some of the playground altercations that I had to mediate.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of times something would happen that little Johnny was offended by, and little Billy would say, well, I was just joking.
Yeah.
Well, that's almost an excuse.
Yep.
You actually meant to hurt his feelings, but, to get yourself off the hook, you say, oh, I was joking, just kidding,
Or you say,
so,
I didn't mean it. That's what is at the same time. I didn't
Yeah.
mean it because you're looking for an out. And maybe at
Right.
the time you were trying to be mean and you were trying to get the best of them. But it isn't taking totally all the fun out of things. It's just saying, be careful. And if you have any kind of a question as to how something might be perceived or taken, if that's like someone says, Pastor, is this wrong? And I'll say, well, the fact that you're asking me, probably for you, it probably is, because it's already bothered your conscience. So if you get a little hesitancy, maybe you should think twice on something instead of saying, well, hey, I was only joking. Who knew you'd get so bent out of shape by that? Well, you probably knew they would anyway, and you did it. So next one asks us to explain the meaning of the proverb in verse 23, which says, like a coating of glaze over earthenware are fervent lips with an evil heart. If we had Paulette on here, I could ask her about her pottery work and this glaze, but I think we're all familiar with that. What is it saying in verse 23?
Well, I hate to have opinion again, but it's very nice. It makes the pottery very nice to look at.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, it adds no value to the purpose of the container. It doesn't hold more because it looks nice. It may be nice to look at, but it really didn't add anything.
And the problem with an evil person that's using his or her words that sound very sincere, they're covering up their true intentions. Those fervent lips, they sound like they're sincere, but what's underneath, nothing good. So yeah, I think it's kind of straightforward. Jesus talked about the Pharisees and their whitewashed tombs or whatever it was, that you look so good on the outside, but on the inside, nothing there. So good. So my wife's phone chirping. I have to mute her. Warnings against pride are common in Proverbs. We had in verse 12, for example. Is all pride sinful, or is there an appropriate pride? And if we're saying there may be, what will that pride always acknowledge? So I guess we're saying not all pride is sinful. So what's the appropriate amount of, or what is appropriate pride?
Pride in your children, your wife, your family.
Yeah, when you take pride in others, and not so much in yourself, but you're taking pride in others, that in a way, thanking God, like for your children or your spouse and the gifts that God has given to you. What other kind of pride is appropriate?
Kind of a humble pride in your good name, your reputation, your, those that hold you in honor, that type of stuff.
And I think that when you take pride in something, if you always go that next step, and behind it all is because you're acknowledging that these are undeserved blessings from God, your family, your work, your church, your abilities, anything like that. If you have God in the picture, then it's appropriate. Now you get to that next one. When does it come, or when is it inappropriate? And that last question, what will proper pride always acknowledge? Well, when is it inappropriate, or when does pride become arrogance?
When it fails to acknowledge the Lord's work in it.
Because if you fail to acknowledge the Lord, then you're going to take credit for it. So, and I think that's the thing too with our faith, as long as we acknowledge it's from Christ and the Holy Spirit, and then we're not going to take it upon ourselves. If you don't think it comes from God, that's where you have sinful pride, and even in the fact that you believe. So, good. Anyone else on that? If you look at the bottom, it says all the verses in this chapter describe people and actions that are negative. The fool, the sluggard, the meddler, the gossip, the phony, the liar. They all are exposed and condemned. Christians need instruction on how to act and how not to act. So sometimes by using the negative, we can learn as well. Next week in chapter 27, we're going to get in some general observations about people. And really 28 is going to have that, kind of goes for a couple of chapters through 29. And then we're going to look at God's creation. And that last wonderful thing, lady, don't miss Proverbs 31. Final advice, and a wonderful woman is portrayed, what we all should be looking for, or fortunately maybe have found in our wives. So, but yeah, just some general observations that kind of open our eyes a little bit. Anything else for tonight from anyone? Let's wrap it up with prayer. We pray, Holy Spirit, you have come to us through your word, and once again, we're better off for it. Thank you for what you do for us. Thank you for keeping us close to you, and thank you for leading us so that we grow in your word and your knowledge of everything that you have done for us and for our salvation. This is all because of Jesus, our Savior. In his name we pray. Amen.